My dad called me crying. How could you do this to your mother and little sister? What are you talking about? I didn't do anything to them. I stepped outside the office confused. You put them in that machine and now they're in the hospital dying. I tried to make sense of what he was saying. He explained through tears that Mom had wanted to use my Tesla Cybertruck for errands. She'd taken my 15-year-old sister Amy along for the drive, put it in self-driving mode like she'd seen me do 100 times. But something had gone wrong, and now they were both in critical condition at Regional Medical Center. I left work immediately and drove to the hospital in my roommate's car. The whole way there, I kept thinking about how I'd shown Mom the self-driving features, how I'd assured her it was safe, how I'd left the keys on the kitchen counter that morning knowing she might need the car. The emergency room was chaotic when I arrived. Dad was pacing in the waiting area looking destroyed. His shirt had blood on it, and his hands were shaking. He grabbed me the moment he saw me and started apologizing for yelling, said he was just scared and didn't know what else to do. A doctor in scrubs approached us with a grim expression. He explained that Mom was in surgery, and it was touch and go. The trauma was extensive, and they were doing everything they could. I asked about the crash details, expecting to hear about another car or a tree or something. There was no collision. Your mother has 3 gunshot wounds. The doctor's words didn't make sense. Gunshot wounds? But you said it was a car accident. Dad's face went pale. The doctor showed us the intake forms. Multiple wounds consistent with small bullets. No signs of vehicular impact. The Tesla was also found parked normally on the side of the road with the doors open and blood on the seats. I asked about Amy, but the doctor looked confused. He checked his tablet and the admission logs. There was no record of a second patient from the scene. No 15-year-old girl admitted with Mom. The paramedics had only brought in 1 victim. She was with her. They went together. Dad was getting frantic now. Hospital security pulled up footage from the ambulance bay. 1 stretcher coming in. Just Mom. The paramedics confirmed they'd only found 1 person at the scene. The passenger seat had been empty, except for Mom's purse and some blood. I called Amy's phone right away, but it went straight to voicemail. Dad seemed just as lost too, calling her friends frantically, but nobody had seen her. We were standing there trying to figure out what to do when my phone buzzed. A text from Amy's number, just 2 words that made my blood run cold. Help me. I showed Dad, and we both stared at the screen. Another message came through. A location pin. Some warehouse district on the other side of town. Then a photo that made me want to get sick on the spot. Amy tied to a chair in what looked like an empty room, but behind her on the wall was something that changed everything. Photos of our family, dozens of them, some recent, some from years ago, all taken from a distance like someone had been watching us. And in the center was a blown-up picture of Dad at a gun range, holding the same gun that based on the bullets shot Mom. The timestamp on this printed-out photo was from this morning. Dad, where were you when Mom got hurt? My voice came out strange. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Started mumbling about errands and losing track of time, but I'd seen that look before. The guilt, the panic, the way he kept rubbing his hands like he was trying to wash something off. You followed them. You saw them in my car, and you followed them. I backed away from him. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. He broke down completely. He admitted he'd been paranoid about Mom leaving him, so he put a tracker on my Tesla months ago. Then he saw her driving somewhere unusual and followed. He found her meeting with someone he didn't recognize, a man. They'd talked in the car for 20 minutes before Dad lost control. I just wanted to scare them, but the gun went off and he couldn't finish. Where's Amy? I grabbed his shoulders. She ran. After the shots, she just ran. I tried to follow, but she disappeared. He was sobbing now. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Amy. This time a video. She was still tied to the chair, but now someone else was in frame. A man I didn't recognize wearing a mask. He held up a sign that made everything clear. You took something from me. Now I'm taking something from you. I stood there staring at the screen until someone touched my shoulder. A man in a wrinkled suit held up a badge showing he was Detective Curtis Shaw. He looked maybe 40 with bags under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. He asked if we could talk somewhere private and led Dad and me down a hallway away from the busy emergency area. We ended up in a small consultation room with a table and a few chairs. Shaw closed the door and immediately put his hand out for our phones. He said they were evidence now and we couldn't keep using them. Dad handed his over right away, but I hesitated because that was my only way to hear from Amy. Shaw explained that whoever took her could be tracking our phones or listening to our calls. He gave us both temporary phones from a bag he carried and said his tech people would monitor everything that came through. The new phone felt weird in my hand like it didn't belong to me. Shaw sat down across from us and pulled out a notebook. He said they were treating this as 2 separate crimes that might be connected. Mom's shooting was attempted murder, and Amy's disappearance was kidnapping. That meant different teams working different angles but sharing information. He asked detailed questions about my Tesla and whether it had any tracking features or cameras. I explained the whole Sentry Mode system and how it recorded everything around the car when it was parked. Shaw's expression changed slightly, and he asked if I'd ever posted anything online about the car or our family. I felt my stomach drop because I knew where this was going. I admitted I'd made some posts in a Tesla owners group a few months back. Nothing major, just showing off some features and talking about the technology. Shaw asked specifically about surveillance footage, and I told him about the video of someone stealing packages in our neighborhood. The sentry mode had caught this person in a hoodie, taking stuff from porches, including ours. I'd posted it to warn other owners, and maybe help identify the thief. Shaw's jaw tightened, and he asked me to write down every social media account I had, every forum where I'd shared content about the car or our family, every place someone could have learned about us. I grabbed the pen he offered and started making a list while my hand shook. Facebook, Instagram, the Tesla forum, a local neighborhood watch group. Each one felt like another way I'd exposed my family to danger. A woman in surgical scrubs pushed through the door before I finished writing. She had bloodstains on her clothes and looked exhausted. She introduced herself as Valentina Marsh and said she'd just finished operating on Mom. Dad jumped up, asking if she was okay. Valentina said Mom survived the surgery, but it was touch and go for a while. She'd lost a huge amount of blood, and they'd had to work fast to stop the bleeding. 3 bullets hit her torso in different spots. One of them nicked her spine, which was the biggest concern now. Even if Mom woke up, there could be serious problems with movement. Maybe permanent paralysis in her legs, or worse, depending on how much damage the bullet caused. Valentina said they wouldn't know the full extent until Mom was stable enough for more tests. Dad made this horrible sound like someone punched him in the gut. He started crying and saying he only wanted to scare them. He never meant for the gun to actually fire. He kept repeating that he just wanted Mom to stop and talk to him. Shaw looked at 2 uniformed officers standing near the door and gave them some kind of signal. They moved closer to Dad while I sat there feeling absolutely nothing toward him. No sympathy, no sadness, just disgust that this was the man who raised me, the man who taught me to ride a bike and helped with homework. Now he was someone who shot my mother and put my sister in danger. I couldn't even look at him anymore. The temporary phone in my pocket buzzed, and everyone in the room went quiet. I pulled it out with shaking hands. Another message from Amy's number. Just 2 words this time. TikTok. Shaw moved fast, taking the phone from me and making calls to his tech team. He talked in low voices about tracing signals and cell towers. Then he turned back to me and explained that kidnappers usually bounce their signals through multiple towers to avoid being tracked. It could take time to narrow down a location, maybe hours, maybe longer. I asked what we were supposed to do while Amy was out there scared and alone. Shaw said the best thing was to let his people work and not do anything that might spook whoever took her. Shaw told one of the officers to take me to a different waiting area while he talked to Dad alone. I didn't want to leave, but I also didn't want to be in the same room as Dad anymore. The officer led me down another hallway to a smaller waiting room with better chairs and a coffee machine. Through a window, I could see into the consultation room where Shaw sat across from Dad. Dad was gesturing with his hands and crying. His mouth moved fast like he was explaining or making excuses. Shaw just sat there taking notes and occasionally asking questions I couldn't hear. I watched them for a while, trying to understand how we got here, how my family fell apart in less than a day. About an hour passed before Shaw came out to find me. He sat down in the chair next to mine and said Dad was being held for questioning. They'd probably arrest him officially soon on multiple charges. Attempted murder was the big one, but there was also felony stalking and maybe other stuff depending on what else they found. Shaw pulled out his own phone and showed me screenshots, pictures of an app on Dad's phone that tracked locations. My Tesla's location history going back 6 months, every place Mom drove, every stop she made, every time she went somewhere Dad didn't know about. The invasion of privacy made me feel sick. Shaw swiped through more screenshots showing dates and times and addresses. One address kept coming up over and over. Shaw said it was a family law office downtown. Mom had been there 3 times in the past month, always during Dad's work hours when he wouldn't notice she was gone. Shaw looked at me with tired eyes and said this probably meant Mom was planning to leave Dad. She was meeting with a divorce lawyer, getting her options, making plans to get out. That's what triggered Dad's paranoia into something violent. He saw her meeting with someone he didn't recognize and assumed the worst. Shaw explained this was really common in domestic violence situations. The most dangerous time for victims is when they try to leave. That's when abusers lose control completely and things escalate fast. My stomach twisted as the pieces fell into place. The man Mom met wasn't some affair. It was a lawyer helping her escape Dad's control. Shaw watched my face change and nodded once. He explained that victims leaving abusive relationships face the highest danger during that exit period. Statistics showed most domestic violence murders happen when someone tries to get out. That's why police treat these cases with such seriousness. I sat there feeling sick about what Dad had done, about how Mom was just trying to protect herself and Amy, about how his paranoia and rage almost killed her for wanting freedom. A forensics officer walked over carrying a tablet. She handed it to Shaw and said something quiet I couldn't hear. Shaw's expression shifted as he scrolled through whatever was on the screen. He turned the tablet toward me and explained they'd pulled preliminary data from my Tesla's impounded storage system. The sentry mode had been active during the shooting. Multiple cameras captured everything from different angles. He swiped through several video files showing Dad's car pulling up, showing him getting out with the gun, showing Mom's face through the windshield right before the shots. But then Shaw paused on another clip. A different vehicle had passed by the area slowly about 10 minutes before Dad arrived. Dark sedan, windows tinted, moved like it was watching something. Shaw enlarged the footage and played it again. The sedan rolled past Mom's parked Tesla at maybe 5 miles per hour. No reason for a car to go that slow, unless the driver was looking at something specific. The plates were obscured by some kind of cover or mud, deliberately hidden. I stared at the grainy image trying to recognize anything about the vehicle, the make, the model, anything. But the video quality wasn't clear enough, and I'd never seen that car before. Shaw said this could be connected to the kidnapper. Someone who knew exactly where to find Amy after she ran from the shooting scene. Someone who'd been watching and waiting for the right moment. My temporary phone buzzed in my pocket. Everyone in the small waiting room went quiet. I pulled it out with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Another message from Amy's number. This time a video file. I hit play, and Amy's face filled the screen. She was crying. Her voice came through broken and scared. She said she was cold, said she didn't know where she was, said please help her. Then the camera shifted, and a man appeared in frame behind her. He wore a ski mask, and the audio distorted his voice through some kind of filter. The processed sound made everything feel more wrong, more dangerous. He said I had 6 hours to bring Dad to a specific location. The address appeared as text at the bottom of the video. If I didn't show up with Dad, Amy would get hurt worse. The video cut off. Shaw took the phone from me immediately. He was already making calls before I could say anything, talking fast to his tech team about tracing signals and cell towers and data points. Then he ended the call and looked at me with hard eyes. He said absolutely not to any kind of exchange scenario. Bringing Dad to meet a kidnapper was not happening under any circumstances. Shaw explained that negotiating with kidnappers rarely ended well for the victim. Giving in to demands usually made things worse because it proved the family would comply under pressure. That just led to more demands and more danger. He was setting up a command center approach instead. I'd be kept informed about the investigation, but I wouldn't be allowed to make unilateral decisions that could put Amy in more danger. I stood up fast enough that my chair scraped loud against the floor. I told Shaw that Amy was my sister. I couldn't just sit here doing nothing while she was terrified and alone somewhere. Every second that passed was another second she suffered. Shaw's expression didn't change. He said the best thing I could do was provide information and let trained professionals handle tactical responses. Then he asked if I'd noticed anyone following our family recently. Strange cars in our neighborhood. Anything unusual that might help identify who took Amy. I forced myself to think back over the past few months. It was hard to focus with Amy's crying face stuck in my head, but I tried to remember anything odd or out of place. There was a white van that parked on our street several times. It didn't belong to any neighbors, and I'd wondered about it but never thought much of it. Just assumed it was some contractor working on a house nearby. And one night, maybe 3 weeks ago, someone rang our doorbell really late, like 11 at night. I went to answer, but by the time I got to the door, nobody was there. I'd dismissed it as kids pulling pranks. Now it felt different, more sinister. Shaw pulled out a notepad and wrote down everything I said. Then he made another call, and within 10 minutes, a sketch artist arrived. A woman maybe 50 years old with gray hair pulled back. She sat down next to me with a tablet and stylus, started asking questions about the white van. What size was it? Did it have any markings or logos? Were there windows in the back? What color exactly? I did my best to describe what I remembered, but it had just been a white van, generic looking, no special features that stood out. We worked through the details for 20 minutes. The artist created several versions based on my descriptions. Shaw explained that stalkers often conduct surveillance for weeks or months before acting. They build detailed profiles of their targets, learn routines, find vulnerabilities, figure out the best time and place to strike. The door opened, and a woman in business casual clothes walked in. She introduced herself as Gabriela Contreras from the hospital social services. She'd heard about our situation and wanted to check on me, offer resources for trauma counseling and victim support. Her voice was kind, but direct, not sugarcoating anything. She sat down across from me and said I was dealing with multiple traumatic events happening all at once. My mother shot and fighting for her life, my sister kidnapped, my father arrested. That was more than anyone should have to process alone. She had information about therapists who specialized in family trauma, support groups for people dealing with violent crimes, financial assistance programs for victims. I nodded along but couldn't really focus on what she was saying. It all felt too distant, too abstract. Amy was out there scared and Mom was upstairs unconscious. Those were the only things that mattered right now. I asked Gabriella about Mom's prognosis. What were we really looking at? She looked at me for a long moment before answering. Then she was honest in a way that hurt to hear. The next 72 hours were critical for determining if there was brain damage from blood loss and shock. Mom had lost so much blood that her brain might have been deprived of oxygen for too long. Even if she survived, there could be permanent problems, memory issues, cognitive difficulties, and the spinal injury meant she'd probably never walk normally again. Months of rehab lay ahead if she made it through, maybe years. Her previous physical abilities were likely gone forever. Gabriella's words settled over me like weight. Everything was broken. My family was shattered into pieces, and I had no idea how to put any of it back together. Shaw's phone rang, and he stepped into the hallway to take the call. I sat there with Gabriella watching him through the glass window. His face changed while he listened. Got harder somehow, more focused. He came back 5 minutes later and sat down across from me. The warehouse location from that first text was empty. Officers found nothing except a burner phone taped under a table in the corner. No Amy, no signs anyone had been there recently. Just that phone sitting there waiting to waste our time. The kidnapper knew we'd call police, knew we'd send people to check, set up the whole thing as a fake lead to keep us running in circles. I felt something break inside me hearing that. Not anger exactly, more like watching my last bit of hope drain away. Shaw explained this meant we weren't dealing with some random person who grabbed Amy on impulse. This was someone organized, someone who planned everything carefully. The surveillance photos proved he'd been watching us for weeks, or maybe months, learning our routines, figuring out the best way to hurt us. People like that don't make mistakes. They think through every step before they act. Shaw said the careful planning suggested someone with a specific reason to target our family. Not just opportunity, but actual motivation. A grudge he'd been nursing long enough to put together this whole operation. The forensics team processed the burner phone and found partial fingerprints on the battery compartment. Shaw got the results an hour later. The prints didn't match anything in the criminal databases. Not federal, not state, not even local arrest records. Shaw said this probably meant the kidnapper had never been arrested before. No prior record of any kind. Which made identification way harder because we had nothing to compare against. No witnesses saw anything at the warehouse. No cameras in that area. Just the phone and those useless fingerprints that didn't lead anywhere. I asked what we were supposed to do now. Shaw said they'd keep working other angles. Background checks on Dad's contacts. Analysis of the surveillance photos. Trying to trace where the burner phone was purchased. But he was honest, that without more information, we were basically stuck waiting for the kidnapper to make contact again. My temporary phone buzzed in my pocket. Another text from Amy's number. This time it was a photo that made me want to throw up. Amy's student ID card, the one she kept in her wallet, sitting on a concrete floor next to a lock of her brown hair. Someone had cut off maybe 3 inches, just to prove he could, just to show he had physical access to her whenever he wanted. The message underneath said, "Your father took something precious from me, now you understand loss." I showed Shaw, and he took photos of the screen for evidence. Then he studied the message for a long time, asked me to read it again, focus on the exact words. Your father took something precious, not you, not your family, specifically my father. Shaw wanted me to think about anyone Dad might have wronged, business deals gone bad, personal conflicts, anything that could create this kind of anger. I explained Dad worked in insurance claims processing. He reviewed accident reports and medical bills, decided whether the company would pay out or deny coverage. Over the years, he'd probably denied hundreds of claims, maybe thousands. People got mad when their requests were rejected. Sometimes they made threats, called the office yelling. A few even showed up in person demanding to talk to supervisors. Shaw pulled out a fresh notepad and started writing down everything I remembered. He asked if Dad ever mentioned specific problems with angry customers, anyone who seemed particularly unstable or made serious threats. I tried to think back through conversations at dinner, Dad complaining about work, but he dealt with angry people constantly, so nothing really stood out as unusual. Shaw said we needed to build a list of Dad's recent denied claims, focus on the past year. Anyone who made threats or filed complaints about the decision. Anyone who seemed obsessed or contacted the company multiple times. He assigned 2 officers to start pulling Dad's work records, contact his employer and get access to the claims database, run background checks on everyone who'd been denied coverage recently. Shaw told me to keep thinking, try to remember any names Dad mentioned, any situations that seemed worse than normal, anything about customers who scared him or made him uncomfortable enough to talk about it at home. 6 hours went by with nothing new. Officers worked through Dad's records. Shaw coordinated with other departments. Forensics kept processing evidence, but no real leads developed. No breakthroughs that pointed toward Amy's location or the kidnapper's identity. I sat in that consultation room feeling exhausted in a way that went beyond just lack of sleep. Fear does something to your body, makes everything feel heavy, makes it hard to think straight. Gabriella brought me a sandwich and chips from the cafeteria, said I needed to eat something, keep my strength up. I tried a few bites but couldn't swallow. Just sat there holding the food while my stomach twisted. Shaw looked exhausted too. He'd been working this case since I first showed him those texts. He brought in a fresh detective to take over for a few hours. Guy named Martinez, who Shaw briefed on everything we knew so far. Shaw said he was going to catch 2 hours of sleep in his car, told me to wake him if anything changed. Martinez settled in with the case files and started making calls. A nurse came to tell me they were moving Mom to the ICU. Her condition was stable enough now that she didn't need the trauma unit anymore. They'd set up a room on the 4th floor where she could be monitored long-term. I was allowed a short visit if I wanted. I followed the nurse through hallways that all looked the same. White walls, bright lights, that hospital smell of cleaning products and something else underneath. The ICU was quieter than the emergency department. Darker somehow, even with all the lights. Mom's room was the 3rd door on the left. She looked small in that bed. Tubes running into her arms, machines beeping steadily, wires attached to her chest monitoring her heart, a ventilator breathing for her. I sat in the chair next to the bed and took her hand. It felt cold. I told her we were looking for Amy, that Shaw and his whole team were working on it, that I was going to find her and bring her home safe. I had no idea if any of that was true, no idea if Mom could even hear me, but I said it anyway because I needed to believe it was possible. The nurse came back after 10 minutes and said I needed to let Mom rest. I squeezed her hand one more time and left. Shaw was back when I returned to the consultation room. He looked slightly better, more alert. He had news about cell tower data. Amy's phone had pinged off towers near the Riverfront Warehouse District before it went completely dead. The signal tracked there over about 20 minutes, then nothing, like someone smashed the phone or pulled the battery. Shaw said police were setting up a search grid. The warehouse district covered maybe 40 blocks, dozens of old buildings, most of them abandoned. Some still had businesses operating. It was going to take time to check every location, but at least they had somewhere to focus their efforts now. I asked how long a search like that would take. Shaw said probably 12 to 16 hours if they did it right. Had to be systematic. Check every building thoroughly. Can't just walk through and glance around. The kidnapper could have Amy hidden anywhere. Basement, upper floor, inside a shipping container. They needed to be careful and complete. I told Shaw I wanted to go to the search area. Needed to do something besides sit in this room waiting. He said that wasn't a good idea. I'd just be in the way. Might even compromise the search if the kidnapper was watching and saw me there. But I kept pushing. Said I'd stay in the car. Wouldn't interfere with anything. Just needed to feel like I was helping somehow. Shaw looked at me for a long moment. Then he agreed, but with strict rules. I rode with him. Stayed in his vehicle at all times. Didn't talk to other officers. Didn't try to search on my own. If he told me to wait somewhere, I waited. No arguments. I agreed to everything. We left the hospital and drove across town toward the river. The neighborhoods changed as we got closer. Nice houses turned into apartments. Apartments turned into warehouses and industrial buildings. Everything looked run down. Broken windows, graffiti covering walls, empty lots filled with trash. Shaw drove slowly through streets where nobody seemed to be around. He pointed out the search perimeter. Officers were working in teams, 2 or 3 people per building, starting at the south end and moving north. We parked near a closed factory. Shaw got out to talk to the search coordinator. I sat in the passenger seat looking at all those buildings, knowing Amy was somewhere in this area, somewhere close, but having no way to find her. Officers moved between buildings with flashlights cutting through the dark spaces. I watched from Shaw's passenger seat as teams of 2 or 3 entered each structure and came back out 10 or 15 minutes later shaking their heads. Shaw sat next to me making notes on a tablet and coordinating with the search teams over his radio. He explained they had to check every floor and every room because rushing through could alert the kidnapper if he was watching from somewhere nearby. I understood the logic, but sitting there doing nothing while Amy was trapped somewhere in this maze of buildings felt wrong. Another team emerged from a warehouse with broken windows and tagged the building as cleared on Shaw's map. The process was slow and careful, and every minute that passed made my chest feel tighter. Shaw's radio crackled with updates from different teams reporting empty buildings or signs of recent homeless activity, but nothing connected to Amy. I asked how many buildings were left, and Shaw showed me the map with maybe 30 structures still unmarked. At this rate, it would take all night and into tomorrow morning to finish the search. A van pulled up near us, and 2 officers got out with a German Shepherd on a lead. Shaw explained the K9 unit would try to track Amy's scent from the dumped phone location to see if they could narrow down where she'd been taken. We drove 3 blocks to where officers had found the burner phone under that table. The dog handler let the shepherd smell a piece of Amy's clothing that Dad had provided from home, and then released the lead to let the dog work. The German shepherd moved in circles around the phone location, and then picked up a trail heading east toward the river. We followed in Shaw's car while the handler jogged behind the dog through empty streets and past chain-link fences. The shepherd led us to a loading dock behind an old factory building and stopped at a concrete platform. The handler checked the area and pointed out tire marks in the oil-stained pavement that looked recent. Shaw got out and took photos with his phone from multiple angles, while I stayed in the car watching. The dog tried to pick up the scent again, but kept circling back to the same spot, like the trail just ended there. Shaw called for a forensics team to analyze the tire marks and see if they could match them to a specific vehicle type. I felt the hope drain out of me, as it became clear this was another dead end. Whoever took Amy had parked here and then driven away, taking any trace of her with them. Shaw got back in the car, and we sat there for a few minutes while he made calls to coordinate the evidence collection. I stared at those tire marks, thinking about Amy being loaded into some vehicle and driven to another location we had no way to find. Shaw started the engine and headed back toward the hospital. The search would continue through the night, but we both knew the chances of finding Amy in that warehouse district were dropping fast. The drive back felt longer than the drive out. Streetlights passed overhead, and the city looked normal, like nothing terrible was happening. Shaw's radio stayed mostly quiet, except for occasional check-ins from the search teams still working through buildings. We pulled into the hospital parking garage around 9 at night, and I realized I hadn't eaten anything since breakfast. Shaw walked with me back to the consultation room where we'd spent most of the day. Gabriella was waiting there with paperwork and a tired expression. She told us Dad had been formally arrested a few hours ago and transferred to county jail for processing. The charges were serious enough that he wouldn't be getting out on bail anytime soon. She mentioned he'd been asking to see me, but Shaw cut in and said that wasn't a good idea right now. He explained any contact between us could complicate the investigation or mess up my emotional state when I needed to stay focused on finding Amy. Gabriella agreed and said I shouldn't feel pressured to see Dad or talk to him just because he was asking. I told them both I had no interest in seeing him anyway. The thought of looking at Dad after what he did to Mom and what his actions led to with Amy made me feel sick. Shaw nodded and said that was a healthy boundary, and I shouldn't feel guilty about protecting myself from more pain. He reminded me that Dad's choices created this whole situation, and I didn't owe him anything right now. Gabriella left to check on something, and Shaw went to get coffee. I sat alone in that room, staring at my temporary phone and hoping for another message that might give us a real lead. Valentina came in wearing fresh scrubs and looking less stressed than earlier. She sat down across from me and pulled up Mom's chart on a tablet. Mom's heart rate and blood pressure were holding steady in the normal range. The surgery repairs were holding, and there was no sign of internal bleeding starting up again. But Mom was still unconscious and not responding to any tests they'd tried. Valentina explained they were watching for brain swelling from the blood loss and infection from the bullet wounds. Those were the two biggest dangers in the next 2 days, besides the spinal injury problems they already knew about. I asked when Mom might wake up, and Valentina said there was no way to predict it. Some patients woke up within hours, and others took days or weeks. They were keeping her sedated partly to let her body heal without the stress of being awake and in pain. I thanked Valentina for the update, and she left to check on other patients. Shaw came back with 2 cups of coffee and handed me one. We sat there drinking coffee that tasted like chemicals and not talking much. My phone buzzed around 11 that night with a new message from Amy's number. The text said the kidnapper wanted the original footage from my Tesla's cameras. Specifically, he wanted the Sentry Mode recordings from months ago, claiming they contained something that belonged to him. Shaw's whole body language changed when he read the message. He leaned forward and asked me exactly what was in that neighborhood video I'd posted online back then. I pulled up my old posts in the Tesla Owners Forum and found the video from about 4 months ago. The footage showed a figure in a dark hoodie moving between houses on our street and taking packages from porches. The person had grabbed a box from our front step, and the camera caught a pretty clear side view of their face for a few seconds. Shaw watched the video 3 times and then asked if I knew whether this led to any police investigation. I told him I'd filed a report and given the video to local cops, but never heard if they caught anyone. Shaw made a call to someone at the station and asked them to pull up old theft reports from our neighborhood around that date. He put the phone on speaker while someone searched their database. A few minutes later, the voice said there was a report matching my video, and a suspect named Ross McKay had been questioned, but released, because they didn't have enough proof he was the person in the footage. Shaw asked for Ross's file and description. The voice read back details about a guy in his early 30s with a scar on his right jaw and previous arrests for theft and breaking and entering. Shaw looked at the video again and zoomed in on the figure's face. There, in the side view, was a visible mark on the right side of his jaw that could definitely be a scar. Shaw thanked whoever was on the phone and hung up. He pulled up Ross McKay's criminal background on his tablet and started reading through pages of information. Ross had a history of small crimes going back to his teens. Stealing things, breaking into cars, trespassing. There was also a restraining order from 2 years ago where an ex-girlfriend accused him of following her and showing up at her work repeatedly. Shaw said this pattern fit someone who would do long-term watching and planning of revenge for something they felt was unfair. He made more calls to get Ross's last known address and sent officers to check it out. We waited for almost an hour before Shaw got a call back, saying the address was an apartment that had been empty for about 6 weeks. The landlord let officers inside, and they found equipment for watching people set up in the main room, cameras with long lenses, recording devices, a laptop with files of photos. Shaw asked them to secure the scene and get forensics over there immediately. He told me we'd go look at it ourselves in the morning, but right now, I needed to try to get some rest, because tomorrow was going to be another long day. I barely slept that night on a cot someone brought to the family waiting room. Shaw shook me awake around 6 in the morning and handed me coffee in a paper cup. He drove us across town to the apartment address where Ross had been living until 6 weeks ago. The building was old brick with rusted fire escapes and broken security cameras. The landlord met us in the lobby, a tired-looking woman in her 50s who kept a baseball bat behind her desk. She unlocked Ross's former unit, and we climbed 3 flights of stairs that smelled like cigarettes and old food. The apartment was empty except for equipment bolted to the walls and floor, cameras with huge lenses pointed toward the windows, recording devices stacked on metal shelves. A laptop sat on a folding table surrounded by printed photos. Shaw's forensics team was already there taking pictures and bagging evidence. I walked to the wall where dozens of photos of my family were taped up in neat rows. Pictures of Mom getting into her car, Dad leaving for work, Amy walking to the school, me driving the Tesla. Some photos went back months based on the seasonal changes visible in the backgrounds. Ross had been watching us since at least early summer. Shaw pointed to a timeline Ross had created on another wall, mapping our daily routines down to 15-minute intervals. Mom's errands, Dad's golf schedule, Amy's soccer practice, my work shifts, everything documented with obsessive detail. I felt my stomach turn looking at how much Ross knew about our lives. Shaw put a hand on my shoulder and said this level of surveillance wasn't my fault, that Ross was clearly unstable and would have fixated on someone eventually. But I knew posting that video had put a target on us. I'd made us visible to someone dangerous, and now Mom was dying and Amy was terrified somewhere. The landlord came in, and Shaw asked about Ross's forwarding address. She pulled out a rental agreement showing a P.O. box in the next county. Shaw sent officers to check it immediately. The landlord mentioned Ross always drove a dark sedan, maybe a Nissan or Honda, and paid rent in cash every month. Shaw showed her the Tesla footage from the morning of the shooting. She confirmed the sedan in the video looked like Ross's car. Shaw got on his radio and put out an APB with Ross's description and the vehicle information. Then he turned to me and said, finding Ross could take days or even weeks since he clearly planned this and knew how to avoid detection. I couldn't accept waiting weeks while Amy suffered in some unknown location. I asked Shaw what would happen if I just gave Ross the original footage he wanted. Shaw sat down on a folding chair and explained that giving in to kidnapper demands rarely works out, that it usually makes things worse because it proves the victim will cooperate under pressure, which encourages more demands. He said kidnappers who get what they want often escalate anyway, because they've already crossed major lines and know they're facing serious prison time regardless. I understood the logic but couldn't stand the idea of Amy being hurt while we followed proper procedure. Shaw could see I was struggling and suggested a compromise. His tech team could create a fake USB drive with edited footage that looked authentic, but removed identifying details of Ross's face. They'd build in metadata that would pass basic inspection and buy us time to keep searching. I agreed immediately. Shaw made calls, and within an hour, 3 people showed up with laptops and equipment. They set up in a conference room at the police station and started working on the decoy drive. I sat there watching them manipulate video files and create fake timestamps while officers came and went with updates on the search. None of the updates were helpful. The P.O. box address was abandoned. Ross's car hadn't pinged any traffic cameras in weeks. His phone was off or destroyed. Shaw warned me this could take a long time, and I needed to prepare myself for a difficult wait. The tech team worked through the entire night building the fake drive. I dozed in a chair and woke up every time someone spoke. By morning, they had something that looked convincing enough to pass a quick review. Shaw examined it himself and said it should work as long as Ross didn't have time to analyze it carefully. A nurse called my temporary phone around 7 to say I could visit Mom in the ICU. Shaw drove me to the hospital and waited in the family area while I went back to Mom's room. She looked exactly the same as yesterday. Tubes and wires everywhere. Machines beeping steadily. Valentina came in while I was standing there and checked Mom's charts. She said they were reducing the sedation medication slightly to test for brain responses. I asked what that meant, and she explained they needed to see if Mom could breathe on her own and respond to stimuli. But she warned me not to expect anything dramatic like in movies where people suddenly wake up and talk. Real recovery from this kind of trauma took time and happened in tiny steps. I thanked her and sat with Mom for 20 minutes before Shaw texted that we needed to go. Ross had sent another message with a location for the drop. An overpass on the highway about 15 miles from the hospital. Shaw said we had 2 hours to get there. Back at the station, Shaw's team fitted me with a wire taped to my chest under my shirt. They gave me the fake USB drive in a plastic case and went over the instructions 3 times. Hand over the drive. Ask where Amy is. Leave immediately without trying anything heroic. Shaw emphasized that last part repeatedly. Officers would be positioned around the area, but I needed to stay calm and follow the plan exactly. We drove to the overpass in 3 separate vehicles. Shaw parked 2 blocks away where he could monitor everything through binoculars. Other officers spread out in different positions, all wearing regular clothes so they wouldn't be obvious. I walked onto the overpass alone just as the sun was coming up. The highway below was empty, except for a few early morning trucks. I stood there holding the USB drive and trying not to shake. Ross appeared from behind a concrete pillar wearing a black mask and dark hoodie. He was limping slightly on his right side like something hurt. He moved fast and grabbed the drive from my hand before I could say anything. Then he pulled out a laptop from a backpack and sat down right there on the ground. My heart was pounding, so hard I thought the wire would pick it up. Ross plugged in the drive and started clicking through files while I stood frozen watching him. Shaw's voice crackled in my hidden earpiece telling me to stay calm. 2 minutes passed. Then Ross's whole body went rigid. He looked up at me, and I could see his eyes through the mask holes. They were cold and angry. He stood up slowly and said I was still trying to cheat him, that I hadn't learned anything about consequences. He pulled out a phone and held it toward me. The screen showed live video of Amy sitting in what looked like the back of a van. I realized he'd been moving her between locations this whole time, so we couldn't track her down. I started begging Ross to tell me what he really wanted. I said I'd trade places with Amy right now if he'd let her go. Shaw's voice in my ear told me to stick to the script, but I couldn't help it. Ross laughed and it sounded bitter and broken. He said I took away his freedom and reputation with that video, that the police had questioned him for hours, and his family stopped talking to him, and he lost his job. Now he was taking away everything I loved, so I'd understand how it felt to lose what mattered most. Shaw's voice crackled in my ear, telling me to keep him talking while they worked on finding the signal. I forced myself to look at Ross and asked why he went after my whole family instead of just me. Ross shifted his weight, and the laptop screen reflected in his mask as he stared at me. He said he was just going to rob some houses that night back in September. Normal stuff he'd done before without problems. But then my Tesla caught him on camera, and I posted that video online for everyone to see. The police came to his apartment and questioned him for 6 hours, even though they couldn't prove anything. His boss saw the video and fired him anyway. His girlfriend left because she didn't want to date someone the cops were watching. He said the video ruined his life even without an arrest. So he started watching me back to see what other cameras I had. He wanted to know if I was still recording him or tracking him somehow. But then he got interested in all of us. He learned our schedules and routines. He saw where we went and who we talked to. He said it felt good to know everything about the family that destroyed his life while we had no idea he existed. I asked why he sent those messages to Dad about Mom cheating. Ross laughed and said he needed us fighting each other instead of paying attention to him. He'd been planning to grab me originally, but then Dad shot Mom and created perfect chaos. Amy ran right past his van, and he just opened the door and pulled her inside. Nobody even saw it happen because everyone was focused on the shooting. He said Dad made everything easier by being paranoid and violent. The surveillance showed him exactly how to manipulate our family into destroying itself. Shaw's voice came through again, saying they almost had the location. I needed 30 more seconds. But Ross's phone buzzed and he looked down at it. His whole body went stiff. He dropped the laptop and started running toward a white van parked near the overpass support. I heard tires squealing from 3 different directions. Police cars came from everywhere with lights flashing. 2 officers jumped out and tackled Ross before he made it 5 steps. He went down hard on the concrete, and they pinned his arms behind his back. I heard screaming from inside the van. Amy's voice. She was alive and aware enough to know something was happening. I ran toward the van as more officers surrounded it. One of them pulled the back doors open, and I saw Amy tied to a metal chair bolted to the floor. Her face was dirty, and her clothes were wrinkled, but she was moving and breathing. 2 officers climbed in and started cutting the zip ties around her wrists and ankles. The moment she was free, she tried to stand, but her legs gave out. I caught her as she fell forward out of the van. She grabbed onto my shirt and started crying so hard her whole body shook. I held her tight while Shaw walked over with Ross in handcuffs. He read Ross his rights, while Ross stared at the ground and said nothing. The whole scene felt wrong somehow, like it was happening to someone else and I was just watching. Amy kept saying she was sorry over and over. I told her she didn't do anything wrong, but she wouldn't stop apologizing. Paramedics arrived and tried to check her, but she wouldn't let go of me. Finally, one of them knelt down next to us and talked to Amy in a calm voice. She said they just needed to make sure Amy wasn't hurt, that we could go to the hospital together. Amy loosened her grip enough for them to look her over. They checked her eyes and her pulse and asked her questions about pain. She said her wrists hurt from the ties, and she was really thirsty. They gave her water, and she drank the whole bottle in about 10 seconds. The paramedic said Amy needed hospital evaluation for dehydration and shock, but didn't see any serious injuries. They brought a stretcher, but Amy refused to get on it. She held my hand and walked to the ambulance instead. I climbed in with her and sat on the bench while they got her settled. Shaw leaned in before they closed the doors and said he'd meet us at the hospital. The ambulance pulled away, and I watched through the back window as officers loaded Ross into a police car. Amy squeezed my hand and asked about Mom. I didn't know what to tell her. The paramedic was adjusting an IV line and pretending not to listen. I said Mom was at the hospital and we'd see her soon. Amy asked if Mom was okay, and I had to tell her the truth, that Mom got hurt really bad, that the doctors were doing everything they could. Amy started crying again and asked if it was her fault. I said no, none of this was her fault. Dad did something terrible and Ross did something terrible, but Amy didn't do anything wrong. She leaned against me and closed her eyes. The ambulance ride took 20 minutes back to Regional Medical Center, the same emergency entrance where this whole nightmare started 36 hours ago. They wheeled Amy inside and got her into a room right away. Shaw showed up 10 minutes later with a notebook. He sat down and asked Amy gentle questions about what happened. She described being grabbed near the shooting scene, being moved between different places, a warehouse, a storage unit, the van. Ross gave her protein bars and water, but not much. He made her record those videos and took pictures of her, but she said he never hit her or touched her in bad ways beyond tying her up. Shaw wrote everything down and told her she was really brave. A nurse came in to check Amy's vital signs and start fluids through the IV. Gabriella arrived about an hour later. She hugged me first, and then sat next to Amy's bed. She explained that Amy would need therapy to deal with everything that happened, the kidnapping and seeing Mom get shot, that this kind of trauma needed professional help to process. Amy asked when she could see Mom. I had to explain that Mom was in the ICU and still unconscious, that her condition was critical and we didn't know yet if she'd be okay. Amy cried harder, and Gabriella held her hand. She said it was normal to feel scared and confused, that we'd get through this together with the right support. Shaw came back in and told me Ross was charged with kidnapping and extortion and stalking, plus a bunch of other crimes I didn't understand. He said the evidence was really strong, the surveillance equipment, the videos, everything Ross said on the wire I was wearing. Shaw said Ross would probably go to prison for decades. I asked if this changed anything for Dad. Shaw's expression went flat. He said Dad's attorney had already called asking the same thing, but Dad still shot Mom. He still put the tracker on my car. He still created the chaos that let Ross grab Amy. Nothing about Ross being arrested changed what Dad did. Shaw said Dad was facing attempted murder charges, and those weren't going away. I sat there staring at Shaw and felt something break inside me. Everything that happened in the last 2 days hit me all at once, and I couldn't hold it together anymore. My hands started shaking and I couldn't catch my breath right. Gabriella noticed and moved her chair closer to mine. She put a hand on my shoulder and told Shaw maybe he should give us a few minutes. Shaw nodded and left the room quietly. I tried to apologize for falling apart, but Gabriella stopped me. She said what I was feeling made complete sense after everything that happened. The guilt about the car, the anger at Dad, the relief that Amy was safe, the fear about Mom dying. She told me all those feelings were normal responses to really bad trauma, that I didn't need to apologize for being human. We sat there for maybe 20 minutes while I cried, and she just stayed next to me. She didn't try to fix anything or make me feel better with empty words, just validated that this was hard, and I was allowed to feel destroyed by it. The hospital released Amy the next afternoon after doctors finished checking her over. They gave me a stack of papers with names of therapists who worked with kidnapping victims and PTSD. Amy held onto my arm the whole time we were doing discharge paperwork. Shaw met us in the lobby and said our house was still blocked off as a crime scene. He'd arranged for us to stay at a hotel near the hospital until the police finished processing everything. Amy asked if we had to go back there eventually, and I could hear the fear in her voice. I told her we'd figure something else out, that we never had to go back to that house if she didn't want to. Shaw drove us to the hotel himself and helped carry in the bags of clothes and stuff hospital staff had collected for us. The room had 2 beds and a view of the parking lot. Amy immediately claimed the bed by the window and curled up under the covers. I sat on the other bed and stared at the wall, trying to figure out what came next. 3 days after the rescue, I went to see Mom in the ICU. Valentina was doing her rounds and stopped to talk to me outside Mom's room. She said they'd been testing for responses, and Mom had moved her fingers when they asked her to squeeze. She'd also turned her head slightly toward sounds a few times. I asked if that meant she was waking up, but Valentina's face stayed serious. She explained this was very early progress and didn't guarantee anything about final outcomes. The brain damage from blood loss could still be severe. The spinal injury might leave her unable to walk. They wouldn't know the full extent until Mom was actually conscious and could communicate. Valentina told me the road ahead would be really long with lots of setbacks. that I needed to prepare myself for the possibility Mom might never be the same person she was before. I went in and sat with Mom anyway, held her hand and talked to her about Amy being safe, about Ross being in jail. I told her she needed to keep fighting because we needed her. I called my boss and explained I needed to take unpaid leave to deal with everything. He was understanding, but I could hear the concern in his voice about how long I'd be gone. The financial stress started hitting me hard when I looked at the hospital bills and therapy costs piling up. Amy had appointments scheduled 3 times a week with a specialist. Mom's medical expenses were already in the hundreds of thousands. Gabriella called and asked how we were managing. I admitted I was drowning in paperwork and bills I couldn't pay. She connected me with victim assistance programs that could help cover immediate expenses, walked me through applications for emergency funds and medical payment plans. She also helped me coordinate the schedule between Mom's care needs and Amy's therapy appointments, set up a system for tracking all the police interviews and legal meetings we had coming up. I wrote everything in a notebook because I couldn't keep it all straight in my head anymore. Shaw contacted me about a week after the arrest. He said Ross's sister Nadia had reached out offering information about her brother. She wanted to help with the case and felt guilty her family hadn't done more to stop Ross's behavior earlier. Shaw met with her and learned Ross had stalked other people before us. A former co-worker he thought had gotten him fired. A neighbor who complained about his security cameras. Nadia said their family always made excuses for Ross and ignored the warning signs. She provided testimony about Ross's obsessive patterns and surveillance equipment he'd kept in their parents' basement years ago. Shaw told me this information made the case against Ross even stronger, showed he had a history of targeting people he felt wronged by. Our family was just his latest victims, in a pattern that went back years. 2 weeks after the shooting, the prosecutor called to tell me about Dad's bail hearing. I didn't attend, but Shaw filled me in afterward. The judge denied bail because Dad was considered a flight risk and a danger to our family. Shaw said Dad's lawyer had argued it was a crime of passion and Dad had no prior record. But the prosecutor showed evidence of the months of stalking with the tracker, the premeditated nature of following Mom that day. The prosecutor also argued Dad's actions directly led to Amy's kidnapping by creating the chaos Ross exploited. The judge agreed Dad needed to stay locked up until trial. I felt relief wash over me knowing he couldn't contact us or show up trying to apologize. But part of me also felt sad in a weird way, like I was grieving for the dad I thought I had before all this happened. The person I believed he was turned out to be someone completely different and dangerous. Amy started going to therapy twice a week with a woman who specialized in kidnapping trauma. The first few sessions, she barely talked according to what the therapist told me afterward. But slowly, Amy began opening up about what happened. She had nightmares most nights and would wake up crying. I'd hear her from the other bed and go sit with her until she fell back asleep. Sometimes she'd want to talk about Ross or the warehouse. Other times she just wanted me to stay there so she wasn't alone. Her therapist told me Amy was showing good resilience for what she'd been through. Said the quick rescue probably prevented worse long-term damage to her mental health. But she'd need ongoing support for months, or maybe years, to fully process everything. Amy asked me once if she'd ever feel normal again. I told her I didn't know, but we'd figure it out together. 3 weeks after the shooting, a nurse called me early in the morning. She said Mom had opened her eyes and was responding to questions. I grabbed Amy and we rushed to the hospital still in our pajamas. Valentina met us outside the ICU and warned us before we went in. Mom had partial paralysis on her left side. Her speech was limited to short words and gestures, but her brain function seemed okay, and she recognized people. We went in, and Mom's eyes tracked us as we approached her bed. She tried to smile, but only half her face moved. Amy started crying and held Mom's right hand. Mom squeezed back and tears ran down her face too. She managed to say our names even though the words came out slurred. I told her we were okay, and she was going to be okay too. Mom shook her head slightly, like she understood things would be different now. Valentina explained Mom would need months of rehab to regain whatever function was possible. Physical therapy for the paralysis, speech therapy for communication. But she was alive and aware, and that was more than we'd hoped for during those first terrible days. Life became a constant cycle of coordinating schedules and appointments. Mom's rehab sessions 3 times a week, Amy's therapy twice a week, my own counseling that Gabriella insisted I needed, plus meetings with the prosecutors building cases against both Dad and Ross. I kept everything organized in my notebook, but some days I felt like I was barely holding it together. The financial stress was still crushing even with the assistance programs. The hotel was temporary, and we'd need to find a real place to live soon. Amy was missing school and would need to figure out how to catch up, or maybe transfer somewhere new. But we were all alive. Mom was getting stronger even if she'd never fully recover. Amy was talking about her trauma instead of holding it inside. I was learning to process my own guilt and anger with professional help. The prosecutors said both cases looked strong and justice would probably happen eventually. Everything was exhausting and complicated and hard, But it was also progress towards something better than those first hours in the hospital when I thought I'd lost everyone. So yeah, that's how it all went down. Nothing fancy, no big production, just me talking to you. Thanks for hanging out. It honestly feels like catching up with a friend. Come back whenever you feel like it.